What happens when two of Hollywood's biggest personalities clash in the most explosive late-night television confrontation ever caught on camera? You won't believe what unfolds when Mark Wahlberg's interview tactics finally push a guest too far, creating a firestorm that has the entire entertainment industry talking. Last night's episode featuring Jimmy Kimmel as the guest turned into an absolute disaster that nobody saw coming, and the fallout is still sending shockwaves through social media. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. The tension was palpable from the moment Jimmy Kimmel walked onto Mark Wahlberg's talk show set. What should have been a friendly conversation between two entertainment veterans quickly devolved into one of the most uncomfortable interviews in television history. The atmosphere backstage had already been charged with whispers about Wahlberg's increasingly aggressive interviewing style, and industry insiders were watching closely to see how the seasoned late-night host would handle what many considered to be Wahlberg's most confrontational period as a talk show host. As the cameras rolled and the studio audience settled into their seats, Mark Wahlberg opened with his typical rapid-fire introduction, but there was something different in his demeanor. His usual cocky confidence seemed amplified, almost predatory, as he introduced Jimmy Kimmel with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm but carried an underlying edge that made viewers at home shift uncomfortably in their seats. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got Jimmy Kimmel here tonight, and let me tell you, this guy's been running his mouth about a lot of people lately, Wahlberg said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. The studio audience laughed, but Kimmel's expression remained neutral, professional, though those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he was already on guard. Kimmel settled into the guest chair with his characteristic easygoing smile, but the experienced television host was clearly reading the room. "Great to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me on," he said, his tone measured and diplomatic. But Wahlberg wasn't interested in pleasantries. "So Jimmy, let's cut right to the chase here. You've been pretty vocal about certain people in this business, making jokes, taking shots. Some might say you hide behind that comedy shield when you want to say something nasty about someone. What's that about?" Wahlberg leaned forward, his Boston accent becoming more pronounced as his intensity increased. The question caught Kimmel off guard, and the audience could sense the shift in energy. This wasn't the typical celebrity banter they'd come to expect from these appearances. Kimmel maintained his composure, but his media-trained instincts were clearly kicking in. "Well, Mark, comedy has always been about observing the world around us and finding humor in it. I think most people understand that what happens on my show is entertainment, not personal attacks." "Entertainment." Wahlberg's voice rose slightly, and he gestured dismissively. "Come on, Jimmy. You think calling someone out on national television is just entertainment? You think the people you're talking about see it that way? Some of these people are my friends, and I've seen how your little jokes affect them." The studio audience was now completely silent, sensing that something was going seriously wrong. Kimmel's professional smile faltered for just a moment, and he shifted in his chair. "I'm not sure what specific incidents you're referring to, Mark, but I've always tried to keep things light and fun. If someone felt hurt by something I said, that was never my intention." "Never your intention?" Wahlberg's voice dripped with sarcasm. "So when you spent an entire monologue ripping apart someone's personal life, that was just accidental? When you made jokes about people's marriages, their kids, their struggles, that was all just harmless fun?" The confrontation was escalating rapidly, and Kimmel's media training was being put to the ultimate test. He could feel the hostile energy radiating from Wahlberg, and the studio audience was beginning to murmur uncomfortably. "Mark, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. My show has always been about bringing people together through laughter, not tearing them down." "Bringing people together?" Wahlberg laughed harshly. "You want to talk about bringing people together? Let's talk about some of the things you've said about people in this room, people in this industry. You think we don't talk to each other? You think we don't compare notes about how you treat people when the cameras aren't rolling?" Kimmel's face was now flushed, and his hands gripped the arms of his chair. The seasoned talk show host was clearly struggling to maintain his composure as Wahlberg continued his verbal assault. "I'm not sure what conversations you think you've had, Mark, but I pride myself on treating everyone with respect, both on and off camera." "Respect." Wahlberg's voice was getting louder, and he was no longer making any attempt to hide his aggression. Is that what you call it when you have people on your show just to make fun of them? When you set them up for jokes they don't even know are coming? When you pretend to be their friend while you're planning to humiliate them? The accusations were flying fast and furious, and Kimmel was visibly struggling to keep up. His usual quick wit seemed to have abandoned him in the face of Wahlberg's relentless attack. The studio audience was now completely silent, watching in stunned disbelief as two of television's biggest names engaged in what was becoming an all-out war. "Mark, I think you need to take a step back here," Kimmel said, his voice strained but still attempting to maintain some semblance of professional dignity. "I don't know what's gotten into you tonight, but this isn't the conversation I agreed to have when I came on your show." "Oh, now you want to talk about agreements?" Wahlberg's eyes flashed with anger. "Let's talk about the agreement you had with some of the people you've destroyed on your show. Did they agree to be your punching bags? Did they sign up to have their personal lives dissected for your audience's entertainment?" The tension in the studio was now so thick it could be cut with a knife, and something told everyone present that this confrontation was far from over. Kimmel's face was reddening by the second, and for the first time in his decades-long career, he seemed genuinely rattled. The usually unflappable host was fidgeting with his tie, a nervous habit that his closest friends would recognize as a sign that he was about to lose his composure completely. "Mark, I came here tonight as a colleague, as someone who respects what you do, but you're making accusations that are completely unfounded and frankly insulting." "Insulting?" Wahlberg's laugh was cold and bitter. "You want to talk about insulting? Let me tell you what's insulting, Jimmy. What's insulting is watching you parade celebrities onto your show, pretending to be their buddy, and then turning around and making them the butt of your jokes the second they walk off stage. What's insulting is the way you've built your entire career on other people's misery." The studio audience was now visibly uncomfortable, with some people looking toward the exits and others pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a legendary television disaster. Kimmel's jaw was clenched so tight that the muscles in his face were twitching, and his hands had formed fists on the arms of his chair. "That is absolutely not true, and you know it," Kimmel shot back, his voice rising for the first time since the interview began. "I've spent my entire career trying to bring joy to people's lives, trying to make them laugh during difficult times. If you can't see the difference between comedy and cruelty, then maybe you're the one with the problem." "Joy." Wahlberg's voice was dripping with venom now. "You call what you do joy? Let me tell you about joy, Jimmy. Joy is what those people felt before you decided to make them your targets. Joy is what they lost when you turned their personal struggles into your material. You've destroyed people's reputations, their relationships, their mental health, all for a laugh and a ratings boost." The accusations were getting more personal and more vicious by the second, and Kimmel was clearly reaching his breaking point. His professional mask was slipping away completely, revealing the raw anger underneath. "You're out of your mind, Mark. You're sitting there making these wild accusations without a shred of evidence, without any specific examples, just throwing around these general attacks like you're some kind of moral authority." "Moral authority?" Wahlberg stood up from his chair, towering over Kimmel and gesturing wildly. "At least I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. At least I'm not hiding behind fake smiles and phony charm while I'm stabbing people in the back. You want specific examples? Let's talk about what you said about Jennifer Lopez last month. Let's talk about your little comedy bit about Ben Affleck's personal life. Let's talk about how you've made Adam Sandler the butt of your jokes for years." Kimmel's eyes flashed with genuine anger now, and he stood up to face Wahlberg directly. "Those are comedy bits, Mark. They're jokes. Everyone in this business understands that. If you can't handle the fact that comedy sometimes involves making fun of public figures, then maybe you shouldn't be in this business. Don't you dare tell me what I should or shouldn't do," Wahlberg snarled, stepping closer to Kimmel. "Don't you dare act like you're the expert on how this business works. You've been coasting on the same tired formula for years, punching down at people who trusted you, people who considered you a friend." The confrontation was now physically intimidating, with both men standing face to face in the center of the stage. The studio audience was completely silent, watching in horror as two of television's biggest stars engaged in what looked like it might become a physical altercation. Security personnel were starting to move closer to the stage, clearly preparing for the worst-case scenario. "You know what your problem is, Mark?" Kimmel's voice was shaking with rage now. Your problem is that you can't handle the fact that some of us actually have talent. Some of us didn't need to rely on our tough guy image and our Boston accent to make it in this business. Some of us actually worked for what we have instead of just acting like bullies and expecting everyone to fall in line. The insult hit Wahlberg like a physical blow, and his face contorted with fury. Talent? You think what you do is talent? You think reading jokes off a teleprompter and kissing up to celebrities is talent? You're nothing but a glorified game show host who got lucky and convinced people he was funny. At least I'm not a washed-up actor who had to get his own talk show because nobody wanted to hire him for movies anymore. Kimmel fired back, his voice now matching Wahlberg's intensity. At least I didn't have to buy my way into television, because my acting career was going nowhere fast. The personal attacks were flying back and forth now, with both men completely abandoning any pretense of professionalism or civility. The studio audience was in complete shock, watching two of their favorite celebrities tear each other apart in the most public way possible. Social media was already exploding with clips and commentary, but neither man seemed to care about anything, except destroying the other. You want to talk about washed up? Wahlberg's voice was now a roar. At least I never had to resort to making fun of people's dead relatives to get a laugh. At least I never had to attack people's children to stay relevant. At least I never had to hide behind a desk and pretend to be America's sweetheart while I was actually one of the most vicious people in Hollywood. The mention of family seemed to be the final straw for Kimmel, and something snapped inside him. His face went from red to purple, and his whole body was shaking with rage. You have no idea what you're talking about, Mark. You have no idea what my show is about, what I stand for, or what kind of person I am. You're just a bitter, angry man who's looking for someone to blame for his own failures. My failures. Wahlberg was now screaming, his voice echoing through the stunned studio. My failures? Let me tell you about failure, Jimmy. Failure is building a career on other people's pain. Failure is pretending to be a good guy while you're actually a snake. Failure is what you're going to be remembered for when people finally see through your act. The confrontation had reached a fever pitch, and it was clear that something had to give. The studio lights seemed to burn brighter as both men stood locked in their verbal battle, neither willing to back down. Kimmel's chest was heaving with each breath, his face a mask of pure fury that his millions of fans had never seen before. The usually composed late-night host looked like he was about to explode, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You know what, Mark? Kimmel's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than all his previous shouting. I've been in this business long enough to recognize a bully when I see one. And that's all you are. A playground. Bully who never grew up, who thinks he can intimidate people into submission with his tough guy act. Wahlberg's eyes narrowed to slits, and he took another step closer to Kimmel, close enough that their faces were only inches apart. Bully? You want to see a bully? A bully is someone who uses their platform to destroy people who can't fight back. A bully is someone who pretends to be their friend and then stabs them in the back for entertainment. A bully is someone who thinks they're untouchable because they have a network protecting them. You're describing yourself, Mark. Kimmel shot back, his voice gaining strength. You're describing exactly what you're doing right now. You invited me onto your show under false pretenses, and now you're trying to humiliate me on national television. You're proving every single thing I've ever said about toxic masculinity in Hollywood. The mention of toxic masculinity seemed to trigger something primal in Wahlberg, and his whole body tensed like a coiled spring. Toxic masculinity? Are you kidding me right now? You're going to sit there and psychoanalyze me like you're some kind of expert? You're going to use your liberal Hollywood buzzwords to try and make me look bad. I don't need to make you look bad, Mark, Kimmel said, his voice now steady and controlled, which somehow made it even more cutting. You're doing that all by yourself. Everyone watching this can see exactly who you really are. They can see the real Mark Wahlberg, not the sanitized version your publicists have been selling for years. The studio audience was now completely transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. Some were recording on their phones, others were whispering to each other in disbelief. But all were witnessing what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked about moments in television history. You think you know who I am? Wahlberg's voice was becoming hoarse from the shouting, but his anger showed no signs of diminishing. You think you can judge me based on what you see in the tabloids and the gossip columns? I've worked harder than you ever have. I've earned everything I've got, and I don't need some fake comedian telling me who I am." Fake comedian. Kimmel's laugh was bitter and harsh. That's rich coming from someone who can't even fake being a decent human being for the length of a television interview. You want to talk about working hard? I've been making people laugh for over 20 years while you've been coasting on the same angry tough guy persona since the 90s. Wahlberg's face was now practically purple with rage, and veins were standing out on his forehead. You've been making people laugh? You've been making people laugh at other people's expense. You've been building your career on cruelty and calling it comedy. At least I'm honest about who I am. Honest. Kimmel's voice cracked with incredulous laughter. You think this is honesty? You think ambushing a guest on your show and screaming at them like a maniac is honesty? This isn't honesty, Mark. This is you having a public meltdown because you can't handle the fact that people are starting to see through your act. The words hit Wahlberg like physical blows, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes that looked almost like doubt. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by even more fury. My act. You want to talk about acts? Your entire career is an act. Your nice guy persona, your family man image, your concern for social causes. It's all an act designed to make people forget that you're actually a vicious, petty little man who gets off on hurting people. That's it, Kimmel said, his voice suddenly calm and decisive. I'm done with this. I'm done with you. I'm done with this show, and I'm done pretending that what you're doing here is professional or acceptable in any way. Kimmel turned toward the studio audience, his back to Wahlberg, and addressed them directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize to all of you for what you've had to witness here tonight. This is not what I signed up for when I agreed to appear on this show, and it's not what you deserve to see when you came here expecting entertainment. Don't you dare turn your back on me, Wahlberg snarled, grabbing Kimmel's shoulder and spinning him around. Don't you dare try to make this about you being the victim here. You started this when you decided to make a career out of destroying people. Kimmel shrugged off Wahlberg's hand with a violent motion that sent the host stumbling backward. Get your hands off me, Mark. You've crossed every line tonight, and now you're getting physical? This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly the kind of behavior that has no place in civilized society. The studio security team was now moving in, clearly preparing to intervene if the situation escalated any further. The audience was on the edge of their seats, some standing up to get a better view of what was happening, others heading for the exits in case things got even worse. Civilized society. Wahlberg's laugh was wild and unhinged. You think you represent civilized society? You think your brand of passive-aggressive cruelty is more civilized than honest anger? At least when I'm mad at someone, I tell them to their face instead of hiding behind jokes and pretending it's all in good fun. You're absolutely right, Mark, Kimmel said, his voice now ice-cold. Let me be completely honest with you. I think you're a has-been actor who's desperately trying to stay relevant by starting fights with people who are still successful. I think you're an insecure bully who attacks people because you can't handle your own failures. And I think this show is going to be canceled within 6 months because nobody wants to watch a middle-aged man have temper tantrums on national television. The brutal honesty of the statement seemed to hit Wahlberg harder than any of the previous insults. His face went pale, then red, then pale again, and for a moment he looked like he might actually swing at Kimmel. The security guards moved closer, ready to intervene. You, Wahlberg started, but seemed unable to finish the sentence. His hands were shaking with rage, and his whole body was trembling. You have no idea what you're talking about. You have no idea what this business is really like, what it takes to survive in this town. I know exactly what it takes, Kimmel replied, adjusting his jacket and straightening his tie with deliberate calm. It takes talent, it takes professionalism, and it takes treating people with basic human decency. 3 things you've proven tonight that you don't have. With that, Kimmel turned and walked toward the exit, his head held high despite the chaos erupting around him. The studio audience burst into confused applause, unsure whether they were witnessing the end of a career or the beginning of a legend. Jimmy, Wahlberg called after him, his voice cracking with desperation. Jimmy, get back here. We're not done. The show isn't over. But Kimmel didn't turn around. He walked straight through the studio doors and disappeared into the hallway beyond, leaving Wahlberg standing alone on the stage, surrounded by shocked audience members and rolling cameras. The host looked around wildly. as if suddenly realizing the magnitude of what had just happened. Cut! Someone yelled from the production booth, but the damage was already done. The most explosive confrontation in talk show history was over, and the internet was already buzzing with clips, memes, and hot takes about what everyone was calling the meltdown of the century. Mark Wahlberg stood in the wreckage of his own making, his show in ruins and his reputation in tatters, while Jimmy Kimmel walked out into the night with his dignity intact and his legend secure.